Hi, this is Tim Maurer and Drew Tignanelli. It's Monday, September 12th, and just following September 11th, the 10th anniversary, we do want to send our blessings and prayers out to any of those who were really dramatically impacted and lost anyone in that horrible tragedy. But there's a lot of stuff going on right now. Drew, a couple weeks ago, you've sent out a couple of very important emails that gave people a vision for what you're expecting over the course of the next months and maybe even year and a half in the markets, some pretty dramatic changes that we're making as a result of those, and you promised that you were going to follow it up with a video, so here we are. Right. What's going on, and what are we doing?
Well, we have a, I guess the best way to put it is a Gordian Knot in Europe. And so these 17 nations have pulled themselves together and have a single currency, but they're sovereign nations. So picture of it, to put that in context, picture if we live in Maryland and Pennsylvania. Picture that Maryland and Pennsylvania were literally sovereign nations.
Right.
And that there was, other than just some few general agreements as to how you do business with each other,
sure,
you're literally a sovereign nation with your own sovereign military.
Right.
And your own sovereign government, your own Congress and president, your own pension system, your own Social Security and everything, and but they have a common currency. So the way that countries normally will get out from under their, when they make mistakes and so forth, the way they'll normally deal with it is they'd print more currency, they'd inflate their way out, things like that. I mean, it's been going on for centuries. Or they would just collapse the economy and rebuild it, et cetera, et cetera. Well, right now, these countries are sitting in a situation where they don't control their own currency,
right,
but there's many of them that are in a mess. Spain's in a mess, Italy's in a mess, Portugal, Greece. Ireland has a mess, but the interesting thing is that Ireland is actually moving in a direction to come out of this.
It's the spirit of the Irish, Drew, you know.
Well, it's actually, there's a lot to be said for that, even though you say it humorously.
No, I say it meaningfully. You just laugh at me.
There is a lot of truth to that, the Irish will accept the pain of what has to happen, and they'll move forward, and they'll pay their taxes and so forth to get the country out of it.
Sure.
In Greece, it's a national pastime to not pay taxes. Right. Same in Italy, you know. The rich in Italy think, well, I don't want to pay any more taxes. Sure. It's just going to be given away to other people that I don't want to give it to.
Right.
And, so you have a real mess in these countries. Sure. And now all of a sudden, with the austerity that they've put in, it causing the economies to collapse. The more that the economies collapse, the more difficult it is for them to even make the revenue to meet their austerity measures that they're required to meet to get their bailout money.
Circular problem.
Yeah, it is. It's a very catch-22. As I said earlier, it's like a Gordian knot. And the problem now is what happens if they can't resolve these issues?
Right.
What happens? And there's talk of, will they form a United Nations of Europe?
Right.
Like the United States of America, a United States of Europe? That could be one answer, but doubtful that a bunch of sovereign nations will get together and do that. Are they going to spin Greece out, and Italy and Spain or whatever?
Take the troubled economies out?
Yeah, and nobody knows how would that happen? How much would it cost? What would be the consequences to those left over? Because you see, the deal was that all the banks in all these different countries could do business in each other's countries. So the German banks have lent to Greece and Italy and Spain, and the French banks have, and the Netherlands, et cetera, et cetera. And so if all of a sudden now these countries are no longer part of it, their currencies are devalued, their countries are in desperate shape, your banks have lent a lot of money to them.
Right.
So it's a mess, and until that mess gives us some clarity as to a real solution, the equity markets as a whole, now we are not retreating 100%. We're not going to do that because
and by retreat, you mean we're not limiting our equity exposure to zero?
To zero. Right. And, and there's good reasons for that, and that is that the United States has got its own problems. Our money supply is skyrocketing. In other words, the amount of money that Bernanke has produced. He literally in 2002 or 3 said that if our country ever went into deflation or depression again, he'd fly across the America with a helicopter. Literally, he said this. Literally drive a helicopter and just drop money from the sky.
Keynesian economics.
And our money supply is skyrocketing. So this liquidity will keep the economy from collapsing, but it's also causing other structural problems and other bubbles. And one that I see is the Treasury market. 2% yield on the United States Treasury for 10 years makes no economic sense to me. I would never lend money to the United States government. I'm not going to let my clients lend money to them for 2% for 10 years. Even though over the last year or two, that looks like the smart thing to have done, is to lend your money to the United States government. But nobody can predict when these types of things will blow up. And you're best not to look in the hindsight and say, gosh, I wished I would have done that. You're best to say, economically, this makes no sense. I don't know when it's going to blow up, but it's going to blow up.
I'm not playing around with it.
And it's not going to be pretty when it blows up. But here's the point. So the United States government is lending, it costs you 2%, or you get 2% from the government for 10 years, but Johnson & Johnson is paying 3.5%. Kraft is paying 3.5%, 4%. Coca-Cola is paying 3%. Walmart's paying 3%.
How about Canada and Australia?
Well, Canada and Australia are paying, 2, 3, 4% for 10 years, which is the better deal. But actually, it's the Asian countries that are paying even more. I mean, in the Asian countries where they are vibrant, growing economies, where they're net creditor nations, which means they have more money and assets than they do debt. We are the largest debtor nation in the world.
In the history of the world, right?
Ever. $15 trillion in debt we are. Whereas if you look at China and you look at Indonesia and Hong Kong, Singapore, Korea, Japan, these countries are net creditor nations. They have more money than they have debt. And so they are, they're the ones we're lending our money to. I don't understand why somebody would lend a debtor more money like the United States. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't think the United States is going down into the abyss. I think Europe has a chance of going down to the abyss.
And that will impact the United States.
It will impact the world. There's no doubt about it. But I don't think the United States will, because we are still too vibrant an economy. We still have employed too many good policies that, even though there are some bad policies that I wouldn't agree with,
it's encouraging.
The United States has employed a lot of good policies, and we have proven throughout history to be a tenacious nation. Our independence drives us, and I do believe America will resurge and make a good competitive stance with Asia as they really start to take the lead. But we're going to probably make larger equity exposure in the next year or two. I don't know when. Could happen in the next few months for all I know, if something really dramatic happens. But that exposure is going to go toward Asia, or American companies that have exposure to Asia that pay good dividends. Because right now, the emerging market nations have been trying to pull back their economies because the United States has printed so much money. We're exporting inflation to the rest of the world. So, these nations like India and China and so forth, their inflation rates are 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8% even in like Brazil. And that's because of all the excess that the United States has been printing to try to revive our economy. But what it does is it just gets sucked out into those other countries where we do most of our business with.
Interesting.
And so they've been trying to pull back their inflation rates. And so their economies are starting to show signs of deteriorating. Our economy is starting to show signs of deteriorating. I think what we do is we sit back, we be very patient, we wait, we get through this. But when that next opportunity comes, and it's going to be here in the next anywhere from 6 months to a year and a half. Unfortunately, it might be that long. I think it's going to be an incredible opportunity. So that's the story.
That's the good news.
That's the good news. There's always a positive to things.
So we're not prognosticating some sort of end-of-the-world scenario within a relatively short period of time. What we're doing is we're recognizing the risks that are inherent, and we're making the moves that we feel we need to make in order to do the best job for you. This is Tim Maurer and Drew Tignanelli signing off. Have a great day.
Take care.